What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, thanks for checking us out. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing the Vampire Brothers of New Orleans. If you've been with me and following my channel for long enough, you'll know that I have one single obsession in this field and in this community, and that's real vampires. I'm not talking about the human beings who like to live as though they're vampires from the movies, but I'm talking about the actual vampires from movies and television shows, but in real life. I think there is a True Blood type thing happening where they simply live in the shadows, and I have reason to believe, based on lots of research into this subject, that it's almost always in the shadows of the wilderness areas of our world that they're living in, and that they simply don't want to commingle with us, human beings, because we are, after all, their food source, their main food source. Don't get me wrong, I don't think for a second that any one television show or movie, or even one single book about what vampires actually are is 100% true, but I feel like some might have touched on it a bit closer to the reality of the fact than others. I think Anne Rice is very, very close in her depictions in her books, and I feel like she might have known some things that the rest of us don't. I would love to have actual definitive proof that real vampires exist more than any other creature, being, or entity on this planet and beyond, and I've come across some encounters that, if they're to be believed, prove that they do exist and that, at least some of the time, they're exposed for what they really are. However, I've never been fortunate enough to meet one myself and get to spend any time with them or learn their ways, but that's just as of right now, and I hope that one day maybe that'll change. I'm fascinated to the point of literal obsession, and I make no apologies for it. So let's travel back in time to a place that's still known to this day to be and to have been a hub for vampires and their alleged culture pretty much since the dawn of time, or since it existed, New Orleans, and talk about two brothers who might have actually been real vampires secretly living among the society. Let's jump right in. In the 20s and 30s, the city of New Orleans, Louisiana was thriving. It was the busiest part of the country, and the people there enjoyed a vibrant culture and nightlife scene. It's literally called the Big Easy, and that name fits so perfectly and probably came from this carefree era. It was a city of wealth, fueled by the jazz scene emerging right under its nose at the time, and there was nothing but wealth, partying, and general overall debauchery for everyone involved. The people loved living there and enjoyed the nights especially. People from all over the country would travel, some of them great distances, in order to participate and become a part of the melting pot of cultures in New Orleans. New Orleans was a booming and fun place to visit or to live, being able to unwind and just take in the colorful, ever-changing atmosphere. So, if vampires were to actually exist, it's understandable why they would want to live in this particular and specific place. In fact, as many of you already know, legend has it that many vampires settled in New Orleans and all around that area for centuries. And I believe, personally, that there's a group or family of them still there to this day, possibly one of, if not the, main hive. In 1932, a police officer was going about his normal nightly patrol on Royal Street when he came across a disheveled-looking little girl wandering around, seemingly in a daze or in some sort of trance. It was a surprising sight, as it wasn't normal to see such young children wandering around all alone at night, even in that day and age, and even in such a carefree and somewhat lawless place. The officer was concerned because he described the girl's look as, quote, a zombie-like daze, end quote, and so he approached her to try and find out what was wrong and how and if he can help her. As he got closer to her, he saw that she had blood trickling down from her wrists, and it looked as though she'd been cut or something. He asked her what happened to her, and the story she told him was quite the tale. According to this little girl, she'd been taken and held captive by two brothers, and she hadn't been the only one. All of the children, including this little girl, and according to her, had been taken against their will, tied up, and their wrists were slightly cut so that the captors could drink their blood straight from the wounds, or drain it into cups. She went on to explain to the officer that the two brothers were vampires and that they slept during the day and then would emerge at night to drink from the children and prowl the streets of the city for fresh victims. According to her as well, she'd been lucky enough to have been able to escape only because the restraints on her wrists hadn't been tied properly and she'd been able to slip out of her bindings. Obviously and understandably, the officer was highly skeptical of the story the little girl had just told him. Considering her injuries and the distressed state she was in, though, He knew something dire had happened to her, and she'd certainly been through some sort of ordeal. Did he believe it was vampires? No, but he knew there was something, and he was determined to get to the bottom of it. He decided to tell her he believed her and asked her to bring him to where her captors were staying, which was the same place they were allegedly keeping other people and other children. He called for backup, and once the other officers arrived, they followed the little girl to a home located on the corner of Royal and St. Anne in the French Quarter section of the city. The officers were surprised when they found out who lived there. The home belonged to 2 dock workers who were otherwise very unassuming and who seemingly kept to themselves. The men were mild-mannered and they'd never been in any trouble before. None of their neighbors or anyone who knew them ever had a bad or negative word to say about them. Their names were John and Wayne Carter, and they were brothers. The officer knocked on the door and announced themselves numerous times, but there was no answer and no sounds coming from inside of the home. Worried there might have been other victims and other children who needed their help inside of the home, they did let themselves in. They had no idea of the horrific sight they were in for. Within a minute or two, they located 4 other victims who had been tied to chairs, children who were barely alive and with their wrists cut slightly in the same way the initial little girls had been. It was just as she had described to the first officer, and they saw that some of the victims had their bloodied wrists bandaged up. One of them was on the brink of death and in urgent need of medical attention. Lying around the chairs were a number of bloodied cups, and these were thought to have been used for collecting the children's blood so that it would be easier to drink than drinking directly from the source. While all 4 of these victims were alive, even if barely and seriously needing help, the officers would soon discover that there were others in the home who weren't so lucky. In an adjacent room, officers found 15 additional people, all of them with their wrists slightly cut and bleeding, and some of them still alive, but barely. Most of them were already deceased. Those who were pronounced dead at the scene had their bodies wrapped in sheets. It was later estimated that they'd been dead and just lying there for at least several days at that point. Obviously, this was a macabre sight, with the stench of human decay made worse by the sweltering New Orleans heat, and it drew flies that were laying eggs all over the place. There was no sign of the Carter brothers, and the police decided to stay there and lie in wait, thinking they would ambush them once they finally returned home. They thought that would be the easiest way to apprehend these 2 monsters, but they would soon learn that apprehending them would not be as easy as they'd initially thought. Now, there are a few versions of this story, but as always, I'm going to go by the story that's most often reported in the most reputable sources that I have access to. The Carter brothers did eventually come home, which surprised me because I thought for sure that once they noticed the one little girl was missing, they knew the jig was up and took off into the night, kind of like Jacques Saint Germain, whom we've discussed at length here on this channel. But it seems as though they hadn't noticed she was gone yet because she must have left while they were gone. The brothers fought back intensely, and while most people described both of them as being somewhat small men, like being 5 foot 6 inches tall and weighing no more than 160 pounds each, they were able to show the strength of men much larger and stronger than they were, and it was all very strange and scary for the officers. They had no idea who they were dealing with, or what for that matter, but they should have known because the little girl, though dazed when she gave her initial statement, had been very clear and precise in letting the officers know that they were dealing with vampires. These were the undead. Despite their size, the Carter brothers were easily able to take on the 10 burly police officers trying to detain them that night. They knocked a few of the policemen unconscious, even tossed some clear across the room in displays of brute strength and power men of their size had no way of having naturally. The men then jumped from an extremely high height off the balcony of their home and landed smoothly on their feet, only to be apprehended seconds later when caught unawares by some of the officers who remained downstairs and outside, just in case the brothers managed to get away. Though, to be honest, nobody thought that would actually happen, that they were going to jump off the balcony, but they did. Apparently, the Carter brothers wasted no time in admitting their crimes and even going so far as to tell the police that they were indeed immortal vampires who needed to feed on the blood of human beings in order to survive themselves. They said they could be killed either by fire or decapitation, and they insisted to the police that they kill them one of those 2 ways immediately because they were incapable of stopping what they were doing. They were unable to quench their thirst for human blood and reiterated they would starve over the course of decades in excruciating pain should they ever stop. The men were tried, they were found guilty, and they were hanged to death for their crimes. Now, I know what some of you are going to say, and that's that vampires can't be killed by hanging, and they themselves admitted that they would need to be set on fire or decapitated. But let me ask you this then, how do you know that? How would they know that? The locals were so worked up by the time the men had been buried about the legends and rumors of not only what they'd done, but also about the rumors of what they were, immortal, blood-sucking vampires, that they insisted a few weeks later that the bodies be exhumed just to make sure they hadn't escaped their graves at night and gotten away. The graves were dug up to appease the masses, and that's when it was discovered that hanging actually doesn't kill immortal vampires at all, because the coffins were said to have been empty. The brothers were never seen again, and if you're like me and believe most of this story, then you'll know they got the hell out of there and never went back, at least for a couple decades. Remember, it was easy to travel around and assume different identities back then, and people did it all of the time. It gets even more creepy, though, as 2 of their surviving victims went on to become serial killers in that area a few years later. One of them is known only as 32-year-old Philippe, and he killed 32 people before vanishing himself, and he spoke of drinking and draining their blood in a thorough diary he'd written while on his killing spree that he left behind when he vanished into thin air. At first, I didn't put 2 and 2 together, right? As I wrote this script, I really didn't dig too much deeper into this area of it and like write a lot about it. But I'm thinking, were some of them turned? I'm getting into the realm of the fantastical, but not really. I mean, what do we really know? For absolute fact, what tangible evidence do we have? So to me, I believe this story. It seems reasonable that a couple of those 20 to 25 people, including children that they had that they were drinking from, maybe possibly turned, and maybe Philippe was one of them. Another victim, this one still unnamed, went on a deranged killing spree as well, and it said that this one ended in upwards of 100 deaths all around the Louisiana area. Several of the other surviving victims of the Carter brothers didn't end up being killers, but more than a few ended up going insane, and they were committed to asylums. In later years, like decades later, it's said that the Carter brothers returned to the beloved city, and to this very day, there are many sightings of them in New Orleans, particularly in the French Quarter. Of course, I have to address the fact that this story is incredibly hard to narrow down, and there isn't much tangible, actual evidence or reliable information about any of it. But in my opinion, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Lack of evidence is never evidence of lack, or at least that's my motto, and I continue to believe that the Carter brothers were vampires and that most of this story is true, even if it wasn't documented well and was exaggerated a little bit. Think about it. If you lived in that area at that time, would you want the locals being terrified by reading in the newspaper that vampires were on the loose and there'd been a house of horrors found with victims claiming to have had their blood drained from them as a form of sustenance to the undead? Think about how it's alleged the town people acted once the brothers were buried in the ground already. And that seems absolutely like the truth in my opinion, based on research I've done into vampire lore at that time in that place. And honestly, I'm just fascinated, and I wish I could find more stories like this one so that I can become one step closer in my search for at least one real vampire. Let me know what you all think in the comments below, please. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content. If you enjoyed spending this time and hanging out with me, spread the love by sharing this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. Please make sure your notification bell is on and click to all so you receive updates every single time I post anything, whether it be a YouTube short, a pre-recorded video, whether it's myself or Ghost Dragon ZW going live at any point in the week. Check out the description box for some important links, ways to donate to the channel, my Amazon wish list gift link. Please donate through PayPal or Cash App if you can. That'll be on the screen and in the description box. The links for all of my books on Kindle, paperback, and Audible should be found in the description box, but honestly, there's 14 of them, and that's a lot of links. So if you're looking for any of my books in any format, just go to Amazon, type in Gemma Jade Books. Please follow me on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook specifically. Besides, subscribing to my YouTube channel, I need 10,000 followers on TikTok to be monetized, and I only have, I think, like 1,500 right now. So even if you go over there and do nothing other than just like, bookmark, share, and comment on my content, man, I would really appreciate that so much, because I really want to become a part of that monetization program over there. I will be going live over there soon after the summer's over, doing mediumship readings, oracle readings over there, possibly some musical mediumship, maybe using some automatic writing and divination. I'm going to be doing a lot on TikTok live, so you have it, go over there and follow me, or if you're willing, go over there and get it. Please jump on that bandwagon, because there is going to be a lot going on come fall of 2025. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today, you're amazing, you're beautiful, you're perfect just the way you are, and you can do and be anything you want. It's never too late. I believe in you. I got your back. Always go in grace. Smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.